Last in gets first row.
Here.
All right, we have a lot to talk about tonight, so I definitely want to go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Dimiturko. Everybody, can you hear? Am I good on sound? Maybe closer. Mike Dimiturko with Kaufman Associates. We are the planning firm that was selected by the Bureau of Aeronautics to complete the Airport Master Plan update for the Sawyer County Airport. It's something that hasn't been done since the late 90s. And generally speaking, the FAA wants this done about every 10 years or so. So with that, thank you for being here. This is our first public workshop of two that we're going to have during this process. We are going to try to briefly educate you on what we've done so far. It's a lot of information. Everything that has been done so far is online and available to you as you can get to it with the PDF viewer on the website. If you don't have that, I think our comment sheets outside actually give you the website's location. So everything that you see here that is presented, everything that's been presented to our Planning Advisory Committee is available to you. We also have a forward-facing comment opportunity that if you would like to provide written comments, please do so on that website. We want to welcome you and thank you for being a part of this process. It's an important part of an airport master plan. The FAA does not require that a community do public reach. Actually, it's not a requirement, it's a best practice. And I think that was part of what the county wanted to make sure that was done as we proceeded with this project. There's a lot to talk about. Again, I want to be very clear and I'm going to try to be very concise. If we could hold all comments and questions till the end of this presentation, that would work best, only because I want to make sure that we get through this information. And much of what I'm going to say, believe it or not, is going to answer many of your questions. You may have better detail in that question. We're going to certainly give you that opportunity as we complete. I'm hopeful that I can get through this material within about an hour because, again, it is a lot of information. Please hold your questions, maybe write them down, and we'll try to take them as we go. Generalized comments we will note. If you have a question specific to what we have done, we will certainly answer that question as we can. So again, thank you for being here tonight. We do have an online presence. This is being put on a Zoom platform. So we do have people from the community that are also watching from wherever they are, and we welcome them as well. So welcome those that are online. So to start this, if you want to go ahead and start with our agenda, what we are going to do tonight is talk through what we've done so far and what an airport master plan is. An airport master plan is a guidance document that is nothing more than a plan. I'm going to start with the end here. The master plan itself is a document that is put together to help the county and those in charge of the airport provide the guidance that they need to fill out their responsibility that is basically required upon them by the FAA due to their acceptance of federal funds over the last 20 plus years. So with that, the county has an obligation to try to meet aviation demands of the region, of the local community, and that of the aviation community at large. So one of the things that we want to make sure that that is very much understood, that this is a federal installation that is located in your community. While the county itself has the name, the airport was purchased with federal funds. And because of that, the airport must follow FAA federal guidance, the DOT of the United States guidance. And so there are times at which the local community has the ability to speak into what is done at the airport more specifically. But again, understand that we follow federal rules and regulations as the airport is operated. So with that, we're going to talk through the master plan itself, the guidance for which we follow, and we are following the process they prescribe. Again, we are in about the half to 2/3 portion of the completion of the project. This is the point at which most master plans invite the community in to speak into it, because this is where we actually have a presentation of concepts that could be utilized as the airport grows further. So we're going to talk tonight specifically about the phase 1 and the phase 2 reports. The phase 1 report had an inventory of existing conditions, aviation demand forecasting, facility requirements, and the phase 2, which we presented to our planning group today, is just alternative developments. All of the information that you walked by in that lobby was part of these documents that we've already gone through. and we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to finish with next steps, and then we'll open with discussion again, allow you to ask questions or provide your comments. Okay, so with that, let's get to it. Again, an airport master plan itself is it's a prescribed process. We are following what the FAA tells us to do, and what we have to do in a basic nutshell is first identify what is happening now, and then identify what could happen over the course of the next 20 years. And so with that, we follow the process of basically starting with identifying what we're having now and then taking it to the end with a recommendation that will ultimately culminate in a document called the Airport Layout Plan, or ALP. The ALP itself is the drawing which represents what will be about 200 pages worth of information. And that document is simply a plan. So it will be signed by the county. The county will be telling the FAA and the BOA from WSDOT in that signature, we believe that this is the plan we would like to follow going forward. The FAA and BOA will sign it and say, that's a nice plan. We agree with your plan. That's it. Nothing more is guaranteed from that point. It's not guaranteed that the community will actually do anything on it. And it's not guaranteed that the FAA or the BOA will actually perform anything in terms of funding for it. But what it does is it allows and provides the opportunity for the county to ask for and receive federal funding for any of those projects which are eligible. And so that's why it is important that this process then gives the FAA and the BOA an understanding of the capital needs of your community. So this document serves to help tell the story of Sawyer County and the city of Hayward as far as it goes with WSDOT and as far as it goes with the FAA, who don't know what's happening here as far as aviation. So we're telling them that story and helping them understand a little bit more about your airport and your community. And so by the time we're done with this, we will have a document that will go in front of the Board of Supervisors for their approval. And by approving it, they're not guaranteeing anything that will be done. They were simply saying this is our plan that we hope to do someday. Okay, moving forward. As far as the document itself, we started with inventory. And for those that don't know, because again, many times those in a community don't know what a general aviation airport is or does or how it operates and functions. If you want to flip through again, the Sawyer County Airport is a 2-runway system. It has one paved runway that is 5,000 feet by 100-foot wide. It has full instrument capability to serve up to the largest corporate jets in the fleet today. It is not, nor will it ever be, a commercial service airport. You're not going to see Delta Airlines or any of the others flying around here. That has nothing to do with our plan. You're not going to see cargo companies coming in and out of here. I want to dispel that real quick. This is an airport that is used today and will continue to be used by general aviation operators, the vast majority of which have pistons on the front and are moving a lot of people around doing their business or pleasure flights. This airport does, however, have a significant portion of business users that are doing business in your community or in the region. Jack's Links is the most notable, of course, that everybody here would understand. There's many others that use this airport as well. Moving forward, the airport is supported by landside facilities, basically hangars, a terminal building, fuel facilities, and all of those support facilities that help function to transition airplanes from the ground to land or vice versa. And so the airport has been developed over the course of the last several decades and has basically been somewhat stagnant in terms of its availabilities because of hard constraints in terms of its land use opportunities. And if you want to move that to the next slide. One of the things that we do factor, I was asked out in the hallway, is are we factoring other things, other community stuff? And we do. Part of what we have to understand is what's going on in the aviation world in and around Sawyer County. And this is a representation of all the airports in the region. So everything that you see that has circles around it generally is the airspace around one of the nearby airports. Basically, the FAA manages a system of airports of 3,300 plus across the country. And most people don't know that. Most people think of airports, they think of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Dane County, Eau Claire, or they'll think, O'Hare. But frankly, that's about 100 airports. There are 2,900 plus more that are much more like yours in terms of how they function in their community. And most of the ones you're seeing represented by those orange airspace structures are just like yours. Move forward. We also have to consider the environment in which the airport exists. Again, the question asked of me is, does the public have an opportunity to speak into planning? And they absolutely do. One of the things that federal guidance requires of us is to at least consider all of the NEPA categories, some of which is directly related to the community itself. Some of it's related directly to the environment itself. So we have to follow the National Environmental Policy Act and try to do what we can within the constraints of that, plus not trying to impact as much as possible. So we also have to understand what's going on locally with zoning and planning and other things. And of course, there are residences, as an example, nearby the airport. We understand that. That is part of what I call hard constraints when we look at our plans and we try to develop them. That is also a way to help develop an airport around the community and be good neighbors as much as possible within the federal guidance. Next slide, please. Part of that is understanding where's the residential primarily in your community, because generally if there is friction with airport, it is mostly going to be around a noise issue. That is an impact category. I will tell you overflights are not an impact category. And so if you were to ask me about the noise, I could tell you we will evaluate the noise. We are producing noise contours as a part of this. So there will be an ultimate understanding of what the federal government would consider significant as far as noise impact. So we will outline that. But if you were to ask me if just that a plane's flying over your home, if that is an impact, the answer to that is no. The government does not consider that an impact. It's simply a personal inconvenience. I don't know how they define it, but that is something that, as an answer up front, how I would answer it if you asked me that question. Next slide, please. As far as natural resources, again, outside of the human element, that being the residences nearby, probably the most constraining factor for airport development would be as far as wetlands go in and about the airport facility and all of those things that is associated with. So those are things obviously we have to factor in our planning as well. Next slide. Moving into the forecast, one of the things, again, that we have to do as part of a master plan that is one of the two things approved by the FAA. Again, I talked about the AOP. That's approved at the end. What is approved up front is the airport forecast. And next slide, if you could, Andy. We are required to do forecasting. And again, this is the storytelling to the FAA. The FAA does their own national forecasting, which is represented here. They look at a number of different things. For an airport like this, the most important factors are two things. One being the actual number of aircraft based here, and all of what is involved with that could be breakdown of type and all of that. And the second is operations, meaning takeoffs or landings at your facility. You are not towered, meaning there is nobody that is actively managing aircraft activity outside of the pilots who are trained to do so. The reality, though, is there's no absolute known number, but we have a good way of estimating. But what basically is happening across the country is airports like these have more or less stagnated since the Great Recession of 2008, with the exception of a few, this being one of them. This airport has grown in an environment where most GA airports have more or less stayed relatively stable, flat, however you want to call it. We're seeing new growth in a lot of airports simply because the airlines are running out of pilots. Most of the older pilots, especially the Vietnam vets, are aging out, and we need pilots to fly the commercial flights as well, and that starts here. So that's part of the activity as well. So all of those things are factored. We look at a number of other things, next slide please, including your regional demand. What's important to understand is who owns airplanes, where do they live? Most often, almost 90+% of the time, somebody bases their airplane closer to where they live or work. That is almost universal, especially if there's availability of hangar space, and especially if that hangar space is reasonably priced. That is the case here with one exception. There isn't an availability of hangar space. There is a lack of that, which is part of which we're attempting to solve the problem in this master plan. But basically what we're seeing here is most of the airplanes based in and around are somewhat close. You are the big GA airport in the region. There are others, but this airport has the best facility primarily within that 30-mile ring. And so it is likely that those that own airplanes want to be here based upon what we see with the way that the basing is. Next slide. As far as the forecasting, I'm not going to get into the machinations in this room. We can later if you'd like. but we had to run a number of different mathematical models in looking at forecasting, again, primarily trying to answer the two questions: what's your based aircraft look like? Where is it going to go? What do your operations look like, and where are they going to go? And so what we're looking at here, as far as general aviation, again, if you look at the top air carrier, is your commercial service operations by airplanes with more than 60 seats. As you can see, the number is 0, and it's going to be 0. So again, if there's any question of whether or not you're going to see big, massive airplanes, the answer is no. That is not within the planning process. As far as even smaller regional jets, as far as commercial service, again, the answer is no. The air taxi is for hire type operations. That can also mean fractional owners. So these are business jets that are flying chartered type airplanes, or people who own parts of airplanes. The fractional owners are also counted in this category. So what we're looking at, again, are relatively small aggregate numbers for airport. We're looking at about 6,500 total base year operations, going to about 11,500. And for reference, O'Hare does about 500,000 operations. So we're at 1% of the operations that an airport like that would be. So again, a very small number, which again is why you don't have a tower, because the FAA won't fund a tower at an airport until you usually hit about 100,000 annual operations. So you're still at 10% of what it would require. Our 20-year number is still 10% of that. So again, we're not talking about a huge number of operations, but when you break that down and you look at it later, we'll talk about it, is important. So the aggregate is one part of that story we have to tell, going to total operations when you factor the training and all not or whatnot, going to about 17,000 overall. Again, that is one part of it. Andy, if you could flip through the next. The other part is the based aircraft. Right now, there's about 29 airplanes that have been validated as being based here. And I'm using that term on purpose because the FAA uses it. The FAA basically gives you the ability to count airplanes at your airport that are validated through their system online. And the reason that's important is because several airports can claim airplanes because an airplane can base at several airports. And so the airport basically that claims them first is usually the one that gets to keep the airplane until you argue about it or whatever. But right now you have 29. It could be a little higher, a little lower. It's not much difference. What we're suggesting is that number will likely increase over attrition up to 41. So while there will be attrition in airplanes, you will likely still see a net positive increase based on a lot of factors that we looked at in our forecasting. The most important, again, though, is not necessarily the aggregate. It is as far as it goes when it comes to hangars, because those airplanes need a home. Most people who own an airplane do not keep it on a ramp anymore. It's because that's a huge investment, and weather in all of the things associated with that take that airplane to a value that's lesser than. So the goal is to hangar them. That's what the aggregate number is important with. Andy, if you go on. This is where things are more interesting as far as forecasting, and this is really what the FAA's main concern is. The definition of the airport's critical aircraft. The critical aircraft, by definition, the FAA's definition is the aircraft or family of similar that operate at the airport 500 times or more annually. And that airplane or grouping of airplanes are what set forth your design parameters on all airfield facilities. And so this airplane's actual number of operations is very important to understand. And this is what the FAA really wants to know. And the reason for that is we will get into the design around the alternatives, is that there's significant changes in different groups of design parameters. When we talk critical aircraft, we're talking about design parameters. And if you think about a road design, if those of you who pay attention to bridge heights, right? 13.9 or 14-foot bridges are becoming standard because truck traffic is taller and the truck has to go under the bridge. Same thing with airports. Airplanes have different things that go on that require them to have wider pavement surfaces, longer runways, wider runways, safety areas that are bigger because of some parameter. What we're showing you here is the actual design put forth by the FAA that we have to follow, and it's an alphanumeric system, which is comprised of an alpha system of A through E, the A being the smallest, or I'm sorry, I don't want to use that word. The the alpha through E stands for the approach speed of the airplane while it's on final approach. And so the slower the airplane, the lower the letter. So an A is the slowest. The E would be a fighter jet. And so as you proceed and you see the planes represented in those boxes, you understand is A is the smaller generally, whereas you get to the C's and D's actually do get bigger in most cases. As far as the second part, the numeric, it's 1 through 6, and that generally represents the wingspan of an airplane. So when you put them together, the approach speed and wingspan create this dynamic that sets forth the design parameters we have to follow and put forth on this design drawing to make sure your airport meets its design safety standards. So that's about as much as I want to say about that. We'll get more into this in a minute if you want to proceed. So what we do have, we don't have a tower, but what we do have is information that the FAA maintains because every airplane that flies in class alpha, which is over 12,500 elevation, and many of them that don't, most turbine airplanes will file a flight plan. And what that does is it tells the FAA you're going to leave, Sawyer County and you're going to go to the Dells or wherever you're going to go. And so they take that information, they publish it into a database called the TFMSC, or the Traffic Flow Management System counts. And what that does is it gives us an understanding of what these more critical airplanes are doing and how many times do they operate. So what we've done is we're showing you here a representation of the last 10 years of turbine operations at the airport. So this is real information. This is minimum. We are certain there are more. We can, if we really wanted to, prove it with fuel records, but it's representative, it's close. But what you're seeing here is the minimum number in each category that have happened in that year during this time frame. And what you'll notice is that most of the operations are in the B categories, B1, B2, B3. If you add them all up, that's generally speaking the highest. And right now, because of that, we have told the FAA your airport is a B2 design standard. It meets that. That's the threshold you're at right now. But if you also look at that table, and if you go to the next one, Andy, we categorize them even better. What you're seeing in the C operations, you're going from 244 to 282 with a couple of times up. And actually, that asterisk that you see on 2023, we did these forecasts in August, and that was year ending. That would have been the 12 months ending August of 23. If you go the year ending today or December of 2023, so you actually have the full year, the C operations have gone up to almost 330. So this year we will be changing this data and making it year end instead of 12 months. But the C operations go to about 330. The D operations go from 22 to about 60. So this year has experienced a significant change, as have many of the other years, in the types of operations being done by the turbine operators. In part, that's Jack Links. In part, that's others that use this airport on a regular basis. And so what we have to understand and plan for is the likelihood that there will be 500 operations by C and D airplanes by the end of this planning period at some point. And the reason that's important is because the standards change between B2 and C2 are substantial. And so what the FAA requires of the community is to at least have a plan in place that can be followed if and when that happens. And because, again, the airport has been obligated to follow these standards in meeting federal guidance by signing its grant obligations. Next slide, please. This is moving into chapter 3. This is where we again took the information we just presented as far as forecasting and applied it to the actual facilities at your airport. Next slide. This is the important slide that you have to kind of digest a little bit. What we're showing you here is the actual design standards for a B2 airport. This is your airport. And what you'll notice if you study it is almost everything is met. Basically, you are doing what you have to do as a sponsor to meet the design standards for B2 airplanes moving around the airport. And as a matter of fact, for C and D airplanes, less than 500, because you're not obligated to do anything about them under 500. So what you're seeing is the runway safety area in the blue, which is probably the most critical. is centered on the runway, extends 300 feet off, not a problem. You have all that property. It's all under control. Your runway protection zones, which is something I'm sure is going to interest some people as we move this discussion forward, is the trapezoids off each runway end. The white trapezoids, what that represents is a two-dimensional surface. Basically, that is the property the FAA suggests strongly that cannot contain any sort of residential use. And by residential, I mean things that bring the congregation of people for an extended period of time. In 2012, they even changed it so much to say they don't want transient interactions, and they would rather roads not go through runway protection zones. So when they do, we have to evaluate whether they should remain or not. That's part of the process. So as we proceed, as you can see, the runway protection zones today for a B2 airport on the north end, again, I'm going to give you some information. You may not, it's going to be detailed, but on the north end, that big RPZ is associated with the current instrument approach on that end, which is not less than 3/4 of a mile visibility. On the south end, it's a smaller RPZ. You can see it's much smaller, and that represents not lower than 1 mile visibility minimums. So an airplane can operate on your airport if you can fly from the north to the south with more than 3/4 mile visibility. They can use that approach and land. Same on the south end for a mile or better, right? All right, so what we're looking at again is an airport that meets its standards. Things are great, with one exception we'll talk about in the land side being not a lot of room left to develop hangars. Next slide. So as we proceeded, we went through all of the machinations, and again, I don't intend to get into all of the data that's on this slide, but we went through all of the needs of the airfield. We looked at runways, taxiways. You have a turf runway. We are promoting as remain as is, as turf, as its current location. Leave it. It's doing a great job. It's functioning perfectly as it should. But as far as the primary goes, what we suggest based on the design change from a C to D, or I'm sorry, from a B to C or D, that your safety areas are going to increase substantially. This is where I was telling you, the safety area off the end of your current runway is 300 feet off each end. The safety area on a C and D is 1,000 feet. So it more than triples in length. It's 150 foot wide now. It goes to 500 feet wide. So it more than doubles in width. So it's a much larger area that it has to be maintained. The RPZs get bigger, as we'll talk about here in a moment as well. All of these things have to be factored. And the question that came up today in our planning committee, and I'll ask and answer it for you, is do you have to meet that standard if it occurs? And if this operator operates at this airport, understanding they're a C3 and the airport's a B2, that's a great question. Unfortunately, the operator doesn't know what the airport is designed for. The operator of an airplane knows two things: what my plane can do and what your runway does. And so when you're flying into an airport, if you're a pilot, you're going to look at the facility as does my aircraft safely operate on that length and width, and can that weight bearing of that runway safely accommodate my operation? If the answer is yes, that's their answer. Again, they're not the design of your airport is not part of the federal registry. It's not out there in the pilot's documents. And so the answer is C3 operate here, D3 operate here, C2s operate here, even though you don't meet their design yet. So the question is, can you stop them from operating here? And the answer to that has been litigated and answered many times by the federal government. The answer is no, you cannot stop an operation. You can't limit an operation. You can't curfew an operation. These are under the federal law of 1991, the ANCA Act, the Airport National Capacity Act. That basically allowed the FAA to mandate that all airplane operators quiet their airplanes. And in return, the operators got the federal assurance that they wouldn't be stopped in any way at operating at airports that are federally obligated. And so basically at this airport, which is federally obligated, you cannot tell them no. You can only give them information. And so that operator will or won't operate based on the information you provide. So what will likely happen if the trends continue is this transition will occur, and then the county is truly obligated to attempt to the best of its ability, meet the design standard increase. So as we get into the alternatives and you see these size changes, you're going to understand why I'm trying to take a moment and really pound this home, because this is truly something that has to be done in response to demand, not and it cannot be not done. I'll take that back. It's something that the airport is obligated to do in response to the demand, and it cannot stop the demand from happening, I guess is the best way I could put that. Next slide. We did the same thing on land side. Here's another very important look at what will happen when that transition changes. That dashed orange line is the increase in size from the existing solid orange line. The existing object-free area of the runway is 500 feet from the runway center line, 250 feet to each side. What happens in the updated standard, it goes to 400 feet, and that line then takes basically half of the apron of the terminal building and jack links, all of that pavement out in front, and it makes it unusable. Literally nothing can be there. So everything that's in that shade of orange is basically no longer allowed to contain anything that's not frangible. So basically anything.
When they expand, nothing can be here.
Perfect. Thank you. And so, so the point being is that in an already constrained environment where we already have not enough room to develop according to meeting demand, we're going to lose more space because that OFA not only hits there, but it goes up and down north to south the runway. Okay. Moving on, next slide. What we did too is we took a look at, based on the aircraft types and general use capabilities, we put together a needs for hangars. Right now, you're looking at, right now the airport has about 116,000 square foot of storage space. To meet the future need, you're going to need well over 170,000. And so you definitely have a need. And what we're even showing in the short term, the next 5 years, you're going to need about 40,000 square foot of hangar space. There are no hangars available right now, and there are a lot of people that want to base here. We heard from several of them today that have many airplanes that want to base at the airport. They just can't. The airplanes are, those hangars are full. And so we have to be considerate of that. That again is an obligation that the sponsor has to try to meet that need. We're also looking at a need for more apron space. Right now, if you go out there on a busy day during the summer, I'm sure you're going to see the aprons full of these corporate operators that are moving people in and around your community. Next slide, please. We also need other things like terminal space. Right now, the terminal is aged. It does serve to function the movement of passengers to and from. However, again, it is the first impression of your community. And while it looks great, and the latest update looks great, it's undersized to serve peak hour demands. And so what we suggest is that the building be expanded or a new one be built in replace of it at some point over the course of the next 20 years. We're also saying the same thing about fueling facilities, maybe to improve to a newer set of facilities. And again, these are all privately owned and maintained and operated to the betterment of the airport. Next slide, please. Now we'll get into the alternatives. And again, all of that information was used to help develop the updated alternatives. And I know that there are many of you that were in and around the area during the last master plan, and some of this is going to look familiar to you. There's not a lot of ways to deal with an increased demand such as you have. So we tried to think out of the box in some ways, but we still have hard constraining factors. So we allowed those in some ways to guide our development. In some ways, we simply said, how should we look at this which we are under the FAA's requirement to deal with that? So we looked at alternatives from a new perspective. Some of these may look similar, but again, next slide. As far as the development opportunities, and it's going to be really hard to see, but I will tell you on these, everything you see in red is new airfield pavement. So a taxiway or a runway change. What you see in the white again are the changed RPZs. Everything you see in that light shade of blue that looks like water those are delineated wetland potential. And so anything in those areas is going to have to go through environmental scrutiny and mitigation if impacted. And so we also, again, understand those constraints. And so what we're showing you here in our first alternative is as we progress through these 4 alternatives, we're getting more and more I guess, aggressive as far as it goes with trying to meet standards and improve the airport's capability of doing what it needs to do to meet aviation demand. And in this one, we're looking at a minimalist approach to trying to meet the airfield. And that is simply putting 500 feet on the north end of the runway, because again, in our facility requirements, and I apologize, we did project that based on the types of aircraft that a runway of 6,000 feet, again, about 1,000 feet longer than it is today, would be the necessary length necessary to meet the needs of the operators. So what we're showing you here is in this option, we stayed at 500 feet on the north, so we're still short of the goal at 6. But the reason for that is we kept the north RPZ off the road. As you can see, what would be the northwest corner is just inside the road, just off of airport property. But and the magenta line you see that zigzags all over is what is now the airport property. That is federally obligated property that is owned basically by the FAA. And so that property is what delineates federal obligation. And so while the North RPZ barely gets off the federally obligated, there's also easement just outside of that to the road that could help make sure that, you know, no new homes or anything like that would be built. So in this alternative, yes, we can provide a longer runway. That's the answer, yes, on the current runway alignment. What you also see is a taxiway that basically moves out to 400 feet separation, which takes up, again, half of the current apron, takes up almost all of any developable space, especially to the north of the terminal building. To the south, there's still some property left down there that is obligated. But again, it doesn't leave a lot. So this would be a great option if all you needed was runway length addition. Next slide. This option and the one that follows is basically looking at shifting the runway itself to the east about 200 feet. And the reason for that is you're trying to build a greater depth of space between the runway and the current terminal area, the hangars, the apron, and the like. And so when you do that, what you see is you now have the capability of building a 5,000-foot runway, 5,500-foot runway to the east, and still get the RPZs in. If I could, Andy, I want to step back. I forgot to talk about the south end. In this alternative, the natural progression of the B to C change on that south end, as it exists right now, nothing being done to the runway other than the airport transitions to C and D design. You will now have, if that RPZ stays at 1 mile, you'll now have residences that currently live there in the RPZ. And there's only 2 options to deal with that. One is the airport would acquire those properties, or the other is you would have to shorten the runway on the south end and again, diminish what you just did on the north end. And so those are the only 2 options. So while you gain 500 feet on the north end, this would push you into a situation which is a negative situation. You would be losing the south end. You'd probably have to either, again, go after acquisition, or you would have to shorten the runway. Those would be the only 2 options to deal with that. Next slide. As you move to the east, you get rid of that. That's one of the benefits, is that you're now moving everything to the east, which includes that RPZ. So now in this situation, you could still have the 1 mile visibility RPZ and it would no longer go over those homes. You couldn't get to the 3/4 mile, which is the biggest of all. There are 3 on there. The biggest would still be over homes, and that would be your allotment in this alternative if you didn't want to have to deal with the acquisition of homes. If you were the Sawyer County, you could still stay at the 1 mile and not have that problem. So again, the primary challenge with this alternative would be the fact that you are now impacting wetlands. So you'd have to deal with the DNR and the federal agencies that look over, and they would have to go through and approve, and there would likely be a higher cost of implementation due to mitigation. Next concept, please. This is the same exact alternative. However, it actually gives you another 500 feet to the south. So this gets to the full 6,000 feet. This is the first of the 3 that gets to 6,000 feet. What it does is it shifts that RPZ back onto properties again to the south because of the extended runway on the south end. So there would be a new home now that would be in that location, leaving you again with the option of buying or shifting the threshold or the actual runway further back up to the north. So that would be the negative. Again, we're dealing with wetlands in this option. Last alternative, please. In this alternative, this one attempts to, again, as the most aggressive, use the existing runway as your parallel taxiway. So this would take the westernmost portion of that runway pavement, reuse it for a taxiway, and then move the runway 400 feet further to the east. So this one gets about 600 feet away from the current runway alignment, or I'm sorry, 400 feet plus maybe 475 from the current runway further to the east. This solves all the problems with properties under the 1 mile on the south end. There aren't any. There could be a one in the southeast portion. And the one issue with this is this actually is where we finally introduce a potential residential property in the northern RPZ. So when you look at this one, there is a property right at the northeastern corner in that yellow box. So in this option, this is an improvement of this is the RPZ, again, the biggest one that you can get down to Cat 1 minimums. If you transition this back to a 3/4 mile visibility like you have today, that property drops out. So there is a mitigating issue that you could deal with without having to acquire. And so that is part of that option as well. This one would absolutely have the most impact for wetland impacts, as you can see, because most of those wetlands occur to the east, so you're getting further into it. So again, we would have to deal with those and mitigate them as well. Next slide. Now we're going to move into the landside alternatives. Similar concepts. These follow with what we did on the runways. This would basically give you the greatest opportunity of development if you did nothing with a runway shift. So this is about the only area where you have a maximum level of opportunity, with the exception of something I'll tell you in the next alternative. But this would give you a new road into the airport, and it would allow for we're showing, and again, this would be actually directed by the private sector. They would actually build hangars as they need. We're giving you an option. With 3 T hangars, there's 12 box hangars and a large conventional hangar and a fuel farm. This would be separating activity across runways. It would create operational expense increase for the community. You would have to, again, have fuel on both sides because you can't run a fuel truck across the runway and you can't run a fuel truck on public roads. So you'd have added expense just by the nature of separating these, and this development would limit the runway from ever being shifted. So this would more or less just stop airport right where it is. And what is ever left would be what is ever left for the remainder of the airport's life. With the exception of building hangars in the wetlands as we proposed in shifting the runway, which is likely never to happen because of private development has to mitigate. It just makes it unfeasible financially for them to do. I never say never, but it's very unlikely that you would ever get private development in a wetland area like that. So all of that said, this is the option that would pair with the first airside alternative. Next slide, please. These next two, this is landside alternative 2, and it has 2 options. The top half of the slide actually shows you development on what is currently airport property. That is actually federally obligated property that is owned by the airport. The bottom portion actually expands into the area adjacent, which is not owned by the airport and would require additional acquisition. And the only intent of this alternative is to also show that if you don't build in the southeast corner, this would be it for the airport if you don't move the runway. This is literally all the land that's left. So if this were the option, again, you could start with the southwest airport, and that could be the end of airport development as well. And so that would be the landlocked look of the airport. Moving to the bottom half of that would be more of a grandiose plan to follow at some point way into the future if that land was available under that alternative. Next slide, please. The next 2 slides actually follow with moving the runway over and why that concept is actually probably the best as far as landside goes as well, because it does provide a greater depth of opportunity for development on the current airport, especially as you move to the north. Right now, with that approach I was speaking to on the north, there's what is known as a glide slope antenna. That antenna cannot be obstructed in any way, and there's a pretty specific clearance around it. What we are projecting is if you shift the runway, you move that antenna to the east side, which would open up the property as we're showing, and it can continue to the north all the way to the end of the runway. So again, it could stay away from the southwest side if this were done. As far as maximizing that, the maximization could occur north first as you proceed into the future. Next slide. This would be a representation of what could the ultimate be if the runway was moved with the current pavement used as a taxiway, again, being the most aggressive airside alternative. You could basically have a north and south development inside the current property line and inside the current road, as we're showing you here. It gives you the greatest flexibility of development, and these hangars represent a 50 to plus year development opportunity. So it far exceeds the capacity we're showing. We're just simply showing you, if you did do this, you're opening the airport's opportunity to serve well beyond the 20-year frame of this study. Next slide. That is as far as we've gone so far in our work. Again, I want to be very clear that nothing at all has been decided. We are still completely conceptual. We have presented this to our community today. We're going to hear from you. We're going to leave this open for comments for the next several weeks. We will, as shown here, be back with our next meeting set in the September-October timeframe-ish. That's our goal. That meeting will have a recommendation. So that will be a much more straightforward meeting. We will say, here's what the airfield recommendation is, here's what our landside recommendation is, and here's the capital plan to help show how that'll be, how to not only be paid for, but how it will stage and the timeline of that development. So that'll be what'll be done in the next meeting. We will have our next workshop at that point. So again, all the information will be presented online first, and then we will be here presenting it as we are tonight. We will also have, I mentioned an environmental overview, which will outline the red flags of development. It is not an assessment, an EA, if you know the world. We simply are going to go through the NEPA categories and indicate which could have issues that need to be addressed based on that recommendation. And we will also do noise contours, because that's usually what most people want to understand is what is the noise impacts of these developments. So that said, that's where we are right now. I am done with the presentation. I am very, very glad to open it up to take your comments and questions. And if we could, I guess we could pass the mic around if anyone wants to do that. And so that we keep it somewhat orderly.
But then you're gonna have.
I'll walk out here.
Sure. Here, go walking around. Is there two? Who wants to go first? I got a question. That's the microphone.
All right, when you're talking about the planes flying overhead over us, you're not talking about the planes taking off from this airport, are you? So if they go up, they spin around and they're flying over us, is that something that is being taken into consideration? Or is that just part of noise?
No, what I was referencing is an overflight. Sometimes people have a belief that if a plane flies low over their home, that's an impact. And my answer to that is it is not an impact category as defined by NEPA. It does happen, and it is definitely something you observe, and it's something you experience. I'm not trying to minimize that. I am simply saying when we talk environmental factors that have to be mitigated, overflights are not one of them. As long as a pilot is flying safely, which they are required to do, they are trained. If they're doing their job correctly, which is getting harder and harder not to anymore because of ADS-B, basically because of ADS-B is in place, the FAA can review almost any flight that's at a certain elevation. So the point being, I was trying to make is some people believe that is an impact category. It is not. The noise that it generates is. Okay. And so when we do the noise contour, we'll show you what the contour looks like. And that's could be an impact category. So for those that know the world, 65 DNL is what the day-night noise level is what the EPA considers significant impact. And so when you're in that ring, They may be able to, likely be able to help mitigate noise with insulation, windows, doors, move, whatever, up and down the list of what can happen. If you're not in that ring, the only thing I can tell you is they will say it's not significant. Not my words. I'm simply repeating what they would say in an environmental assessment. So if that's not part of where you are, they will simply say that's unfortunate, but we can't do anything about it because it's not significant, defined by them, if that makes sense.
I don't think you can answer this question, but I think Derek probably could. What do the pilots pay for a fee for having their hangars there? What is the yearly cost for that?
Depends on the hangar.
You can't even ballpark it. What one of them could be? For a year,
Per month.
per month, okay? Next question is. Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that they by themselves, but that's what the lease is. Are there any stipulations as what they can put into those hangars? Like, for instance, is it just had to be aircraft or could it be like jet skis, snowmobiles and whatever? Because then it kind of becomes cheap storage.
Yeah.
Toys.
Yeah, the
Okay.
FAA actually has guidance on that. There's a mandate that the majority of the hangars used for aviation. If they put their jet ski or their snowmobile in there, that's okay, as long as it's not majority jet ski, snowmobile, whatever.
Okay, interesting. Yeah,
Oh. I don't know. I won't speak on behalf of Sawyer on this one. I will let Andy do that if he chooses. The FAA generally asks airports at their, when they can or capable, to police that. The reason I'm trying to be very, I'm trying to dodge it a little bit because when it's private development, sometimes your lease doesn't allow you to look in their hangar. And so you have to have a reason to look in the hangar. And so it's a hard one to answer. The FAA has always had these rules in place, but they didn't have the enforcement arm. They do now. So they are moving to better police this and help communities police this, but you are also handcuffed with leases sometimes extending 30 years. And so you have to honor their lease as well. That's a legal obligation. So it's hard to get into these hangars, I guess is where I was getting. Sometimes you just don't know.
okay. I've lived there for 30 years and I was really surprised when you talked about the traffic there. I don't see that whatsoever. So I found that very surprising that was there. And then I couldn't remember right off the top of my head what my other question was. I'll think about it.
Yep.
I have a lot of them.
Can we request that you do a policing of what's going on in the hangars? Can we request that they do a policing of what is actually in the hangars if it's such critical space that's needed?
Again, that's number one, it's going to be defined by the lease. And so, because these are privately owned buildings on land that's leased. And if the lease allows you to get into their hangars, some people lock their hangars and you can't get in. And so there's, I don't know, that's a tough question.
It's hard for me to understand though, with all of the authority that the FAA and the airports have, that they can't at least have some authority over this.
It's similar in nature to this. I'll give you an example, and I brought this up earlier today. If the city of Hayward were to approve a 10-story building off the end of the runway, right? That 10-story construction would have to go through what is known as 7460 process with the FAA, and the FAA would respond. And the responses don't do that. But if you do, and the reason that, but if you do, is they don't have local authority over land use. They only have guidance. What they have, in as far as teeth goes, is the ability to take away an approach or to slap the hand of the community in another way. So they can enforce it in different ways. They can't stop it. That is the local authority's requirement. But that's why I'm saying, as far as leases go, that is a local issue.
Maybe I'll just chime in. So the county's been in the process for, I don't know how many years of redoing leases as they've been coming up to strengthen the language so that the tenants are complying with the FAA regulations for aeronautical use. So if we do have a belief that somebody is not complying, and partly what Mike is saying is we have to somehow figure that out or get them to open it up so we can take a look. The truth, though, I think ultimately is it's not hard for a hangar owner who's leasing the ground to meet their aeronautical use. As long as they have a plane, they're either working on it or it's there, and they might have other stuff that's a minority of their space. It doesn't always compute to how often they actually have to fly the airplane. So if that makes any sense, they own the building. So what Mike's saying is we have a limited ability to regulate what they do. But as long as they're meeting the FAA standards, which actually have, I would say over the last however many years, they've dialed them down quite a bit. So what Mike's saying is that, you can have, there was a time when they didn't allow other things in there.
Nothing, yeah.
Yeah, now they allow you to have other things as long as your plane. Yes, you can have your pontoon boat in there. Yes. Yep.
Wait,
Yep. As long as,
hangars are cheaper than you store it.
yep, as
So-
long as they have a plane, that's the majority of the space, and depending how you want to measure that, they can't have those other things in there.
May I ask?
There have been some, we've had a few transitions of hangars in the last couple of years as well. People giving up their hangars for to other owners. We moved the lease. They're able to sell the hangar to another aircraft or airplane owner. So we have been seeing some of that, and we have new leases with those people that allow us some latitude to regulate the aeronautical use.
Someone online had a question?
Yes, may I ask a question, Nancy?
Abs- Yep.
So I live on Namakagon Lane and am one of the 9 families on Namakagon Lane, and then there's more to the southwest. And you're telling us we're probably going to lose our homes, our lifestyle, our way of life, because we're moving from a B2 design standard, which currently meets all of the needs of our aviators except for one, as I understand, the only one that has a Gulfstream. And that's only supposed to projected to be up to 4 in 20 years. Why do we need to do this extensive enlargement of the airport? Why? Help me understand, please, why we can't keep it as it is. You're saying we cannot turn people away, but are they going to come if the airport doesn't support them? And why can't we let that happen?
I need to correct a couple things. First of all, I in no way, nor has the county in any way, shape, or form intimated that anyone's losing a home.
Oh,
We're
yes.
simply, we're
Yes.
simply providing options that could happen, not that they will happen. And that's the difference. And so if that's, I'm not suggesting that the difference is nobody's promoting it right now. The other part of that is you cannot not accommodate them. You can't if that operator, and it's more than one, that was the other thing I wanted to correct. It's more than one. Jack Links isn't the only one, actually.
Oh, we're not talking about.
Uline has the G500.
That's the one. Mhm.
And so there are others, and there's many others. Actually, when you look at just those 2 operators, they are in the minority of all the C&D operations. And so again, we're talking about millions of dollars of investors that are in this community. Well, we were told today billions in terms of investment in the community by people who are using these airplanes. The reality is you have to do something if this transitions or the community is liable for the litigation of the safety non-standard, period.
Okay.
That's the reality. And so the community can go forth and not do anything while they signed on the line that they're obligated to maintain this facility. And so what we're simply trying to help you understand is there are specific things that you have to do under your obligations in terms of making sure the facility meets the federal need. And
So,
by no means are we saying that there's only one option that, I think you said there's 9 homes there. I think there are only a couple options where ARPZs would be over a couple homes. We're not suggesting the acquisition of the entire community at all. Not once did we say that.
It doesn't even, well, you'll be 25 feet from our house. That's not very good. Help me, really, I'm truly wanting to understand how the federal government can say that because there might be people out there who want to fly in these bigger planes that need bigger airstrips, this community must accommodate them. I'm struggling to put my head around that.
The answer is not might be. The answer is the FAA won't even pay for it until you're at 500. What I'm suggesting is that the trends are showing that's going to happen. If that does not happen, you don't need to do it. I can't be any more clear, but if it does happen, which it looks like it will, which is part of what we're trying to outline here, is that you have to have a plan ready because it's going to take every single one of those things that we put on the screen will take 10 years minimum to put forth. Just the environmental process is 18 months just at the beginning. And that would just be the start. That would be the proof that you can qualify for federal funding. So again, this is the first step. And because that trend shows you're obligated to actually provide a solution. That's all. And that's what this plan is a solution to that problem if it occurs.
So two questions, just humor me for a little bit more. So number one, how can the community see that trend? So we know that it's a real thing. And number two, what about the Namakagon River? I mean, this is a national waterway. You're going to put all these engines and all their pollutants into a national waterway? Really?
No. Look, that's not going to happen. The airport has to follow federal guidelines just like every other entity does. The reality is what we provided you is on the FAA's database. I can provide you a link. You can go do the research yourself. This operational information is available. And again, the county is obligated to maintain an understanding of what is happening. So after we leave, when we are done, and by the way, we are not doing anything. We're simply providing a plan for you to do if in fact you take that forward. We're not promoting all of this happening. We're simply identifying it. That's all. And what is being done is going to be a response to the demand, not a promotion of the demand. Again, this is not you build it, they will come. The FAA will not fund that. None of these alternatives are being done so that you can attract that. These alternatives are done to respond to that. And that is happening in your community. These are people that are here. These are not new people. These are people that are here now, and they are operating more now. And for whatever reason, this is a national trend. More and more of the users are using C&D airplanes. That is the trend for all airports. And so all we're saying is that trend looks like, and you are actually only 100 away. You're not far. What will likely happen is as you transition, the first year is not going to be your requirement. You're not going to be pumped right into it. The first year, you're going to see it. You're going to say, wow, we did it. The FAA is going to say, let's see it again. And if you see it again, they're going to say, let's get into the environmental process of whatever you want to do, which take 2 years. And by the end of that, they'll say, are you still here? And then if you are, they'll say, okay, let's get the funding ready to spend to do these things. This is not a willy-nilly. This is going to be a very substantial project if it happens. And so all we're doing is helping you provide a solution to making that happen if you need to. Again, if the trend goes back and the C&D changes back and everybody goes back to a B-2 airplane, you won't have to do it. It'll simply be a plan on paper that collects dust like it did in 97. But what we're seeing right now is a trend that we have to at least represent. Yes, sir.
I'm having trouble when I look at your plan. How would the airport road that's currently there, how would that change based on some of those alternatives that you have?
I don't think I understand your question.
Airport Road is a road that is a thoroughfare from Highway 77 down to Hospital Road that goes back to 63 and then also to the north end of the airport.
Right.
So
And in one alternative, we modified Airport Road. And frankly, again, if the runways aren't moved, that's the only alternative available to the airport to have any substantial growth. That's all we were showing. Again, it's an option. It's not the selected. I can't say it we have to evaluate it. And by the way, because it was said earlier that, it is closer. We understand it's closer, but that land is owned by the government. It is a federal piece of property. And I'll tell you right now, the first thing they would say if we asked them to go to the southeast corner of the airport and spend all the money on infrastructure that's not there, their first comment's going to be, why aren't we doing it over here on our property? And so we are simply putting forth what is going to come back in the form of the FAA comments. I want to be very clear. We're not promoting anything, especially at this point. We're simply presenting the ideas.
So if the road, or excuse me, if the development moves closer to the river, then that would involve possibly moving Airport Road or the town road further to the west along the river?
It would, again, the actual design of that development would be done later. What we were showing you is a maximization of that space, and how that road would look would absolutely be part of that design element, and it would be part of that funding element too.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I do. Okay. Acquisition of homes. I understand all of your options. I get that. I appreciate what you're doing. I do, and the explanation. How do you go about that? Because isn't that when the feds come in and they want your home, isn't it usually bottom dollar?
No,
If they're
actually,
gonna
the federal process is, I mean, believe it or not, it requires a minimum of two local appraisals.
Mm-hmm.
So you could pick your appraisers, and usually two, you can have three, but a minimum of two. And then they average out the price of those appraisals, and that's what they offer you. And so that's how it's done. It follows Europapa, the federal guidance on home acquisition, if that is required. And so that is a standard process for the federal government under AIP, which is the grant process.
Okay, that's what I needed to know. Anybody else? I want to pass this back.
The options that move the runway to the east would not relocate Airport Road at all?
Would not be required, I will say that.
And my other two questions, what's the biggest craft that can use the airport now? How many seats?
The Global's a pretty sizable airplane, and then the Gulfstream 500 are probably the two biggest in size, and they'll seat up to 19 passengers.
But I heard
usually
there was a number before of 60. Are we trying to move or we take airplanes as big as?
No, what
59
I
seats?
said was that category, which had 0 in it across, was 60 or more passenger seats.
Does
And
that,
that's not happening.
okay, so what's the bigger, in this plan, what's the largest? It would be 19 seats or a couple dozen seats would be the biggest that could come in?
Seats aren't, in the general aviation world, you can have a very big plane with only a couple seats in it. And I'm trying to make light of that comment. What I'm trying to suggest is the Boeing business jet, which is a 737, could operate here today. And that has configurations, obviously in the commercial world of 160 seats, in the GA world, 5. It's the same airplane platform, but it's used differently. So seats, I don't think are the point. The point is the design of that airplane, and the C3 is a 737, but you've never had that operation. It's very unlikely to be anything substantially used here. That's usually more of a large communities user. Not to say it can't happen, but it could. But what happens here, I'd say the Gulfstream 5 and the Boeing, or I'm sorry, the Global Express are the two biggest.
Thank you.
My question is, are there other general aviation airports near us that are facing the same issues? And has any thought been given to some type of a load sharing plan? I don't know if you guys can do that or not to balance out the flights in the area, say within 50 or 60 miles. Another question would be, have you guys bounced this off of trying to find a greenfield site, a brand new site?
Yeah, well, on both of those questions, I would say that the FAA would likely not be on board. They have a sunk investment here would be their answer of not doing anything. If that demand wanted to be at another airport, it will be. That is the best answer I can give you as far as why here and not there. These operators generally want to be, the reason general aviation is what it is because airports are convenient. And that's why I said 90+% of the time it's where you live or work. It's why Jack Links is here, frankly. And so that's just the way it is. Across the country, that is normative. And so could they do something like, frankly, I've never seen it because most of the time the distance is too far. I've seen some communities that did other things that helped a little bit, but the reality is they're likely going to want to stay here. And you still have the investment made that you're obligated for the next 20+ years to maintain. So as far as Greenfield goes, there are currently 2 new airports in the NIPIAS, which is the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, which the FAA uses to fund. It's a congressional document done every 2 years. There are 2. One's in Tennessee, one's in Kentucky. The likelihood of ever getting a new airport funded under today's system is almost 0. It's very rare. The FAA, this is why I want to be very clear, to get any of these options on the airfield, especially done, is going to be a challenge. It's not a slam dunk. It's not easy to get funding of this sort. You have to prove the need. You can't just simply say you have it. So to prove the need for a new airport is almost impossible. Not only that, but the FAA's funding mechanism has a priority ranking, and the priority ranking threshold of will fund or won't fund, even though it's eligible, the new airport's below it. And so basically the FAA doesn't have enough money to do new airports. So we could put it forth, and we do, but the first thing you're going to have to do is tell Jack Links we're going to have to move. And so now we got to pay Jack Links to move. And so you not only are building a new airport, you're actually buying out all the leases on your current airport. And so you get into the hundreds of millions of dollars really fast, even on an airport this size. And it's just one of those things that's really tough. So the answer to that is it would be a great concept, but I would also tell you within 20 years, you're back into a constrained factor. It's just what happens around airports. Now I'm just pontificating. I apologize, but it's just what I've seen around the country. It's wherever you build an airport, people go. It's a weird dynamic.
So it sounds like once this airport meets the criteria of 500 for the C and D level aircraft, that the FAA is going to use a carrot, basically say we have money for you to expand and do all the renovations. What if that carrot doesn't work? What if the county takes a position? Yeah, there's money. We're not going to do anything. Is there, outside of the carrot, is there a stick?
Oh yeah, there's a big.
What's the stick then at that point?
First of all, I want to reframe the reference because it's funny that you're bringing it up this way. I've never seen it done that way. The FAA doesn't come to you looking to give you money ever. It's actually quite the opposite. You go begging for the money because you have to do it. You're obligated to do it, and they don't have enough money to give.
Well, there's something prodding people that criteria is being met. So you intimated that something, once that happens, then the FAA is going to approach.
No, it's the opposite. You need to go to them. So you have positive airport management right now. You have a community that's concerned about the airport. So these are the people that will actually be telling the FAA through the BOA what's happening. And so the FAA literally doesn't talk to you. They wait for you to bring the information to them. And so it's your obligation under grant assurances to maintain a close observation of what's happening. You then report back to them, and then they say, get in line. That's why I'm saying this is not a quick process. Even if you have proof, it's going to be challenging. And so you will go to them and say, look, we know we're into a C&D design need. What do we got to do? And they'll say, well, again, start an EA. And that EA is 2 years. That's their way of kicking the can because they don't have the money ready for you. I'm telling you, it's just not there.
So the county is going to have to be a lot more would have to be very proactive because you gave the impression that the FAA would be priding the county, but it sounds like the county would have to be very proactive.
Well, the first thing that's happened in my history is when airports don't be proactive, one of 2 things is going to happen. One, you're either going to be hemmed into a position you can never meet the standard, right? That's Scottsdale, as the example I gave today in the meeting. Scottsdale can never meet the standard they need to be ever because they allowed development to come up too close to the runway on both sides. The airport is hemmed in. It can never do anything more than what it is. They were sued and lost a lot of money because of an accident that happened due to what was perceived legally as a inadequate safety area. They could be sued again and again and again and again. And when you go that way, and again, I hate to bring these up because I never, aviation is safe, but it's human factor. And so with that, you have to understand that you open yourself to a litigation that could look like negligence. And so if you're not trying to deal with the solution, whereas the FAA may not still give you the money, I'm not saying it because again, it's not, and everybody on this row knows this, and you just simply are doing what you can. If you try to do it and something happens, you can at least then represent, we did all we could. And that's defensible.
One more question. Earlier today, you mentioned that Jack Links, due to some kind of decision they've made, they're not always tracked. As far as their numbers are not always tracked into this airports.
Yep.
So we could actually be above 500 right now.
And I know that's locally believed, and I'm not going to argue with anyone.
Well, I thought that's what you said.
I didn't. I know it's believed locally. I will say this. The FAA would tell you that's not true, that the numbers are in there. They believe very strongly in these numbers. They really do. They present TFMSC as the absolute. They will not give you the detailed data around the operation. Because I could actually go in and I can get detailed data of some business jets, where they came from, where they went, what time of day. I can get all of the information that is when they are blocked, you don't get. You just simply get blocked. So what I believe is happening is you're still capturing their operation. You're just not getting their data. And so I think it's still closer than that. It's still not perfect. ADSB would be perfect, and it will be as we proceed, because the FAA is now building their own data ADSB system called IOAA. And when that's in place, they will know absolutely, because that ADSB tells you exactly the time, runway use, everything. They can actually watch you actually taxi to where you're hangared. And so that's why I'm saying it's going to help as we proceed. They will then know locally.
A couple of questions.
Yeah.
We live on the south side of the airport. We bought a house there 2 years ago, and we don't mind the planes. We like the planes, but in our deed, apparently the FDA owns 40 feet or anything over 40 feet over my home.
Yeah.
First of all, how do you determine who's going to cut, and how do you determine who's going to cut the trees, and how do you determine, or who determines it?
Good questions. What I believe, I don't know this to be true, but I believe this is true, that is actually a Sawyer County owned easement. It's not the FAA. And so you would be dealing directly with Sawyer County. And so they own that airspace because they purchased the easement, maybe with a grant or wherever the instrument it was. So I guess you could say technically the FAA owns the easement, but the administration of the tree cutting or whatever would be the county.
So how is that determined?
I'm here as engineer for the airport, do engineering work at the airport. So here to help answer questions like that get into engineering type situations. So typically it's a project that would trigger the need to evaluate whether there are any obstructions to the approaches. We are, doing a project right now to do a rehabilitation of the runway where it is right now. So it's not a reconstruction, it's more of a minor kind of just repaving of the runway where it is now. It's in need of it to get it another 10 years minimum of useful life going forward. So as part of that project, as part of our design, we needed to do a survey of the approaches. So we actually did that survey with our drone. So we flew over and measured the tree heights with our drone, evaluated the tree heights, and found that there were no obstructions to any of the approach surfaces as of the date that we did the survey. So as of right now, we don't have any reason to recommend to the county that trees need to be removed. If a project with federal funding by the FAA, if we found that there were obstructions to the approaches, the FAA will not fund the runway project until those approaches are cleared. And so at that point, if the approaches need to be cleared, or I should say the obstructions removed, because people get bad visions when they hear clear. Typically, it's just removing, discrete obstructions that are penetrating into that airspace, or in your case, it would be above that easement that the airport owns over your property. And in that case, we would identify those obstructions, include them typically in a construction plan. The project gets bid out, and then typically how it works is the contractor on the project. We would work with the landowner, obviously, with a lot of coordination, advance notice, let the landowner know that there are obstructions that need to be removed, work with you to find out how you would like that done, try to keep it, be neighborly, and remove those obstructions.
Has this been done before?
It has. I was involved on a project in 2014 where there was some obstruction removal work. There was some of it north of the airport. The airport owns a navigation easement north, off the north end of the airport, and they also own a navigation easement for a few of the residential properties that are west of Airport Road along the Namakagon River. And we did some obstruction removals during that project.
Well, I'm on the south side. I didn't know why these trees were topped at times. And then through the grapevine, I heard it has been done before.
Yep.
On several properties.
Yep.
And so how do you determine this by height? All my trees, I would say probably the majority of them are over 40 feet.
Mhm.
So you actually have the right to come in there and cut those trees off, and then the tree dies. Is this compensated?
So it would have been compensated when the easement was acquired, and that's all part of the same land acquisition process that Mike explained. So during that process, those easements were acquired prior to the project. Appraisals were done to determine the fair market value that the easement would have on the property value, and the landowner was compensated accordingly for the purchase of that easement.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Another question.
About adding additional hangars to the potential need. As far as like homes in the communities, I'm curious what financial does that bring to us? So like currently, the people that have the hangars at that facility, they pay personal property. As of 2023, that no longer happens. So like Catholics, bringing them up, they're not even within our county. That particular facility that we keep talking about, they're not really being located in our community. And what little bit that we would receive from them as we don't want to be making that money.
Are you comfortable speaking? You brought something up today. You provided an answer. I thought that would be brilliant for this.
I just want to say great job to everybody. Like, this is one of the actually most calmest meetings I've been to, so kudos. My name is Ben Labar. So I actually live under the traffic pattern in Hayward. I do own a hangar at the airport. And it's something like, I can't speak to Jack Link's property taxes and whether that's not going to come here anymore. Can you guys okay, sounds good. But I know like my taxes go. And I don't have any more room for planes. And I know that I'm not the only one. I think Derek's got a long
How many
list.
hangars could you fill, you personally? If
3 right now.
You could do 3 more hangars right now.
Yeah, I will have 3 total. So I've got 1. Not saying that I need that many. I don't right now, but I'm completely full, and I would like to get a engine or a plane that can haul all of my family, and I can't right now. I can't fit it in my hangar. My family has health issues. I'd love to fly them to Phoenix and be able to do that instead of them going commercially. And I know that there's operators here like, that there's people that want to be here that can't. And so my property taxes do go, and we pay a substantial amount of property taxes in the area. And so I'm just one of the hangar owners and local businesses that I'm nobody. I've got paint on my clothes. I'm nothing special. I'm not rich. So it's something like when people say it's for the rich, like I got my license 2 years ago and I had to scrape by to get it. And my little Cessna 150, it hauls 2 people and it's 1967. The other plane's a 1968 or something like that. So it's one of those things like I've got a 4-seater and a 2-seater. So I hope that just that helps just a little bit coming from somebody that my family's been here 5 generations. We've been plumbing in the area for a long time. It's not, I hope that I'm not the enemy, and I know you guys aren't the enemy. We're out of space, and been out of space for a couple decades. And so I just want to see at least something happen to be able to take care of everybody. So thank you guys. You guys are awesome.
You introduce Jackson's out and talk about it. They're not in Sawyer County. They're in Washburn. So it's hard for me when I look at what taxes and money, what that actually is putting back into our community, other than it's a federal obligation for us to have this airport and support these needs. And you've got potential billions of dollars.
It is, and I have not been granted authority to talk about private business dealings. And I'm not going to, but I can tell you that there are a number of corporations that do. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I'll just address the personal property taxes that did go away. So we're working through that now where they don't not pay the property tax. So either we have to record deeds in the Register of Deeds office to separate out the parcels for the hangars, or more likely what's going to happen is still going to be assessed. They'll come to the county, and then we'll have to assess the tax to them and pay it as part of their lease payment. So that's the personal property went away, but it's happening with anything that was being taxed that's on a piece of real estate. It's still going to get taxed, but just the tax bill process will be different. And as far as the economic impact, I mean, I don't want to. That's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down tonight. But at some point we have to do I should say the state, the BOA is in the process of doing an economic impact studies for all the airports to show what the impact is to the community.
Yes.
Just influence, I understand it. Extends with distance in almost every direction from the end of the runway to the end of the area of influence. Is that right? And
I didn't hear the first part of your question. I guess I missed that.
those geometric cones that you show for each end of the runway.
Right.
And they'll change as if the runway is lengthened. And those shapes they're depicted as flat.
They are flat. Yes.
There's no way to understand, at least in the depiction, what their influence is from the point that they leave the airport to the point where they no longer have any influence. Pretty much a fan-shaped direction. Is that?
Yeah, they stop to exist the moment the line ends. Those are just two-dimensional areas. The RPZ is what you're referencing.
Yeah.
It is simply the area, and I believe it was MIT back in the day that did the study of accidents around airports. It is the most common location for accidents around an airport, is the way it was defined. And so that is what the FAA deems is the most important to keep clear of people. For that reason, most accidents are on landing or right after takeoff. And so that's the reason that those areas are protected like that.
And so you're saying then in answer to one other question, it seemed like you were saying that the navigation easement issue is a local issue strictly. Is that right?
It can, well, and again, if it's bought with federal dollars, of course, there's the FAA above that, but it's administered locally. And so the easement itself, the RPZ is a two-dimensional surface. It is intended only to keep people out. There are many, and you'll see in the next phase, many surfaces that extend outward and upward from the airport, sides, ends, and whatnot. And so the easement itself was developed off of some approach surface. I'm not sure exactly which one, but there was a line that it followed, and the 40-foot line was obviously a part of which that line needs to be clear at this point. That's why it's examined when something changes, and you want to make sure that there's an actual obstruction before you go in and cut the tree. Again, no one wants to do that, but again, we don't want an interaction between a tree and an airplane either. And so with that said, that's the examination that's done as far as that goes. Yeah.
use more impervious surface, got all the wetlands to the east. The runway stays at the same elevation as it sits right now. The retention area is bringing into the township road as an overflow. So I don't see any retention area whatsoever on this whole plan, whichever plan it is.
Right.
I'd like to, how do you plan on containing the water?
The level of detail of retention detention will be done in design for many reasons. First of all, we don't have the level of detail necessary to even get to that answer at this point. So the absolute answer is yes, you will have to meet a level of mitigation as far as retention detention goes with not only the runway, but new rooftops, all of it. There will be something done to accommodate drainage as far as it goes. It's a federal requirement. It's part of what they have to do. They're doing right now the SWIP, stormwater prevention pollution plan for the airport to ensure, at least do the best they can to make sure the water's clean going off the airport. And that's something that the airport's doing right now. So that is a requirement and will be contained with any alternative that's done.
Impervious surface, you're going to lose a couple hangers and pretty much for keeping water in your own property, correct?
Again, I'm not going to guesstimate on where that detention would go because it could be anywhere. It could be on the east side. You could figure out how to drain any which way. And so again, I'd leave that up to the engineers and the brilliant minds they have and how to deal with that. But yes, it would absolutely be part of the plan. It has to be. That I can answer very, very clearly.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Would people just use a microphone if possible? I'm sorry, it's just hard to hear.
Yes, sorry about that.
Yes, I have a question. We gave up a big chunk of property so that they could move the road and then put in a taxiway. And we thought we were through with it. Now it seems like we got another fight on our hands. So we're very concerned where it's all going to end.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
And I will say that has absolutely been heard here. And at this point, that's all I can say because we have done nothing more than simply put it on paper. But we heard that today at our planning advisory committee meeting. We're hearing that obviously from yourself and others, that is a valid concern, and that will be part of the factoring on the final plan. But thank you for that comment. Yes, sir.
So if it's deemed necessary moving forward and trying to get the FHA dollars, if any of the people who use the airport who have the funds, can they decide, well, this is how we want the airport and offer their funds to influence which one of those plans would happen?
I would call that highly unlikely. I've yet to see in my 30-year career any private operator jump up and down to fund any capital improvement at an airport. It's hard to get them to build hangars sometimes. And so, and I don't mean to be flippant, but the reality is that the likelihood of this happening without federal funds is low. And so that's part of this process. And I would suggest if I were to talk to Andy, 10 years from now, if the need presents and he can't get the funding, I mean, then you don't do it. The county shouldn't have to go out and spend the money to fund all of these plans if the FAA is not going to do it. So again, the understanding here is that you're putting forth a plan that can meet the design standard. That's all you're doing. You're not obligating yourself to do it. You're simply putting forth a plan. And so when that plan goes to the county commissioners, what I'm going to tell them at the meeting is, this is the plan that helps you meet that standard if and when that happens. And if that is the case, you will then deal with the FAA to get the funds or won't. And if the FAA doesn't believe it, they may say no. And at that point, your obligation's less. They're the ones telling you have to do it. And then if they don't fund it, then your obligation becomes less. And you could take that forward as far as it goes. But it just simply would likely follow a course of slow, would be my guess. Because it takes the FAA the FAA is a giant battleship. It takes them time to get their funding in order. And so that's why I said kicking the can with an EA. That gives them 2 years of breathing room to see if this is still real before they have to spend the real money. And so that's how this would go. And that's why, again, I say They're not going to be pushing you to do it. You're going to be pushing them to do it because you're following your federal obligation. And that's kind of how it is. That is how it is.
Thanks.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to request that you people not continue because you haven't done it so far. Keep us up to date as to what's going on. The people that are here tonight are probably because a handful of us went around passing out flyers about this meeting. And most of the people we talked to knew nothing about this. Airport master plan, what are you talking about? We've gotten a lot of misinformation from airport administration in terms of what's happening. And we didn't know what to believe. And you're doing us an injustice. The flyer you sent out to announce this program was sent to people who lived or had property within 500 feet of the airport. That excludes an awful lot of really interested people that need to know what's going on.
And part of the reason we asked for your email address was not to collect personal information. It's to hopefully have a database we could send out a notice to the next meeting. It is a challenge, believe it or not, to get that word out. Most meetings, by the way, that I've done in my career have many fewer than this at them. So thank you for being here. I definitely appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. When and how likely will the environmental study influence changing the airport? I live on Duffy Road and I've been in that property for about 13 years. And we loved it when the small airplanes went by. They never went directly over our house. And since the road has changed, Airport Road, we now have planes that literally look like they're going to hit the top of our trees directly over our house many times a day. We have 3 to 4 bald eagles that land in those trees every day. There's an eagle's nest on Airport Road. You can see it. It's occupied by eagles every year with the baby.
Yep.
So is that even being looked at?
Again, we are not obligated to do an EA, and actually the FAA wouldn't fund an EA until you have a project, right? We don't have a project. So when you start an environmental assessment, the very first thing you do is you set forth what is called a purpose and need. And that is a project. We are a plan. So what the FAA wants us to do is an environmental overview where we outline the NEPA categories and we outline what we know of them based on our plan. And that's all we have. That's all we literally have to do. Not that we're not wanting to do more. That's it. We also do environmental assessments quite often. So we also know what goes into them. But again, when you start a project, like I said, the first thing you would be asked to do by the FAA is do an EA. You will go through all the impact categories under that purpose and need. So you go through every impact potential. And then by the end, you also do alternatives, by the way. So what we're showing you here will be redone, reevaluated. And so if we leave anything out, someone else will look at it, by the way, so keep that in mind. So the FAA wants a robust review and they'll say yes, or they'll say no. And again, that'll be on them later. That is where action is being done. This is not action. This is a plan. I can't be any more clear. There's nothing more that'll happen with this document, even after approved, than this is a plan. The only thing that will make anything spur is the actual demand dictates. The FAA requires them to proceed with some action, and that would be an EA. And so that's where you would get those answers. That's where the wetlands that we're not going to talk about specifics on mitigation because we're not going to delineate property. That will be done there. If that's the action, they will delineate the wetlands. They will tell you what the mitigations are, if any, or if it's possible. All of those answers come in the environmental. So I don't mean to kick the can either. That's just the way the process goes. And so that's the best I can tell you at this point, but it would happen. Absolutely. Has to happen. It's a federal obligation under the grant process.
Does the FAA have a limitation on the decibel level of some of these jets coming in and landing and taking off from the airport?
The FAA, under ANCA, which I said is the Airport National Capacity Act, the FAA set forth a policy and they called them they gave them stages, not decibels. At the time, we were working with a lot of airplanes that were called stage one, very loud airplanes, not just the commercials, but small biz jets. The FAA mandated that the commercial carriers get to stage three by, I think it was 2002 or somewhere in that neighborhood. They did. The biz jet fleet wasn't asked to do that till later, and they did. Right now, the new jets that are coming out are actually meeting stage four, stage five quietness requirements. So they're very much quieter. So we're in an environment, and the one thing I will tell you is, you know, in like feelings, noise is relative to the person that experiences it. And so one would process an airplane's noise differently than another. So when I tell people it's much quieter today, if you're experiencing it, you may not agree, and that's okay. But it's simply the truth. If measured, it's quieter around all airports, every single one of them, O'Hare all the way down to the smallest airports, because airplanes are quieter. However, it's a relative experience, and so you may feel like it's an annoyance. And so that's why we use things like DNL to try to figure out what is the scientific way of answering the relative question. And so that's why, again, when we put a noise contour out, it's not going to be our opinion. This is the model that the FAA dealt with, EPA, HUD, and all of the other alphabet groups. They came to this conclusion that the 65 DNL is the threshold of significance as defined. If you're in that threshold, you are impacted. If you're out of that threshold, you are not. And that's why, again, I want to be very clear. That is something we will show in the next phase. And I would guess that the 65 is not going to move much off property. Just knowing the operation level and the type of aircraft. So I'm making a prediction only because I've done this for 30 years. Until you get to a large commercial service airport, the contours generally aren't that big, unfortunately. So we have to tell people, unfortunately, the model isn't saying it's significant. And that's basically all that we have as far as mitigation, is to tell you that. So it's a good question. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things that generally don't hit a high at an airport like this.
Well, you mentioned 65 decibels as an average. Well, everybody's been talking about Jack Link. He flies a Bombardier Challenger 350. And when he's coming in on approach, he's 89.6 decibels.
Absolutely.
That's 50% more there.
Well, let me further. A DNL is not a decibel. It's a day-night noise level. It's an average
decibels.
It's the average sound of a day's worth of operations. It's an average. It is not the single event level, which is SEL. The FAA does not deem SEL as an impact. It's similar to an overflight. They don't plan airports around one event. They don't give you money for one event to get a longer runway. They don't mitigate off one event. It's the same thing. And so what the DNL is they take the entire operation. That's why it's a model. They take your average day and they compress all that information into a contour. And that is, again, not just FAA, that's HUD, EPA, that's all of the environmental groups have agreed that this is the standard. And so we use that model. And so it's not decibels. You're absolutely correct. I wouldn't be surprised if you get in a single event over 100. That wouldn't surprise me. It's still not enough to make it significant unless it's more common and more frequent. Nighttime operations, when you run the model, if that operation happens at night, that 86 decibels turns into probably 120 in the model. They penalize nighttime because ambient sound's gone. It's much lower. So when ambient noise is down, that event sounds louder because it's, again, relative. And so that model takes all of those things into account and spits out this contour. Again, not ours. We're only simply following the federal mechanisms on that. And it's unfortunate because I agree with you. It is a loud operation, but they don't fund on singles on the benefit of the airport or in the environmental side.
Well, we're not impacted by the average. These small planes don't bother us. It's these large jets that come in that really bother us.
And that's why I was saying this model is probably likely going to have a contour that won't leave the airport property. That's my guess. I've not done it yet, so I don't know. But until you get into 100,000 plus annual operations, that's when the contour starts really getting larger. Similar to air traffic, that's a lot of things happen around that aggregate number.
Can I ask a question? I'm online here. It's hard to know if I'm interrupting anybody.
Nope, go ahead.
someone mentioned this before, but I just don't see a lot of hard data on proving the demand and the need that you've been talking about. And I'm wondering if there's data you can share on these 10 to 20-year out trend. Also, most of the data I've seen is, or you've talked about, is sort of based on rumor, the 500 planes coming in. The 10 years of previous data that was shown on the screen doesn't show a huge increase in demand. You even once said these are not actual, some of these are not actual numbers. So it's really hard to get my head around, proof of the demand or the need here. So I'm just making that request. And the other thing I wanted to just mention is something that scares me is if we build up, and I have land adjacent to the airport. If we build up and we're building up to accommodate in large part some of these businesses, what if, a business with a significant amount of planes coming in moves or closes or decides to build their own airport? That's going to change things for us a lot.
I appreciate those comments. All I can answer on the first part is Chapter 2 outlines all of that data. That data is again, some of it's our forecasts based on our expertise in doing this for 40 years. Some of it's from the FAA itself. So none of it was rumor. I can absolutely 100% say we didn't use any rumor as far as any of our data sets. And so all of that said,
something you showed on screen, you said these aren't actual numbers. I did hear that.
No, what I was saying is that their database is the minimum number, not that it's rumor. It's that they don't catch every single one. So it's actually lower than likely that occurred. So again, it's probably higher than we're showing, but it's probably not so that it matters. It's probably in the tens of higher instead of something really high. So what I'd suggest.
It's shocking in such a highly regulated industry that we're not counting the numbers of planes.
You wouldn't be the first to say that. I'd leave it at that. It's unfortunate. It's just costs. It's about $500,000 to $1 million a year to run a tower. And so the FAA just don't have the money to do it at airports that have low volume, unfortunately.
I mean, you could almost hand count the planes and somebody could hand count them and they don't come in that often.
You still have to have somebody out there for 12 hours and you run in shifts and federal pay and all the benefits that go with it. It gets real expensive. That's why, again, most airports aren't towered. It's very, very much, again, at the 3,300 airports, I think there's 300 towers-ish.
But I mean, your customers landing on the runways and walking in the terminal door. I just don't understand.
Yeah, and appreciate the comment. I do understand what you're saying, and it's noted. I think we're about I don't know how we are on time. I know that we published till 7. I'm fine here. I'm not suggesting we quit. If you have more questions, I'm good. I just didn't know if the space was. We good? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Oh, good evening, everyone. I'm also a local pilot. My name is Mike Wagner. I've lived in Sawyer County since 1997 and had 2 aircraft, or currently have 2 aircraft based at the Hayward-Sawyer County Airport, and I've provided instruction there since 2000. During that 20+ years, I've been renting hangar space, mostly from Derek and his parents as airport managers, and occasionally from private hangar owners. That was primarily because I didn't have the financial resources when I bought my airplanes to both own an airplane and own a hangar. My financial position is a little better now, and I would really like to have a hangar at the Hayward Airport, but there are no opportunities for me to do so because there are no lots available for construction, and it's very infrequent for hangars to come up for sale, and when they do, they usually change hands before I hear about it. So I'm here as an advocate for the airport and for the construction in a timely manner of some additional hangar space to accommodate me and other pilots who would like to either bring their aircraft here or keep them here. So just wanted to let the people here see the face of another local pilot, airplane owner, and in my case, an instructor who is trying to provide a service to those in the community who would like to learn to fly in the future and would like to maintain proficiency for those who are pilots. Before I finish, I'd also like to thank Mike for doing a really nice job with the presentation tonight. He did a nice job of summarizing the content of the study so far. Being a member of the planning committee and attending the meeting this afternoon and a previous one, we were overwhelmed with the amount of information and data that he gave to us. And I think he did a really nice job tonight of summarizing it and put it in a hopefully understandable format for those here. And I'd also like to compliment everyone who's here for asking a lot of good questions and being polite and keeping this a friendly evening.
Great. Yes.
So you're you're looking at this just little numbers of how the airport's being used, but what if there's an aspiration, say, for the community to have like a commuter service or some kind of service for the community that hasn't really been discussed? Because the airport really serves individuals. There's not really a service to the community at large. Say if people wanted some kind of commuter service to the Twin Cities or Chicago or something like that.
Yeah.
Could that play a role in the design of the airport or the future airport there?
I wish I had better news to offer you, but as a small community, air service is no longer a good option. The commercial airline world has truly shrunk to basically 4 carriers and then a bunch of low-cost options. Commuter airlines are no longer growing, they're shrinking. The federal EAS program, Essential Air Service program is dwindling. And so the product basically is you drive to the large airports, unfortunately. And so this is something that's been happening to small communities across the country. So the likelihood of putting that in the plan is just, we could do it. It's just it's not going to happen, unfortunately.
I do have a bit of a response to that comment about, the airport providing a community service. I'm a pilot. I own an aircraft. I do fly around the state. I fly into Hayward pretty frequently. And I see some things when I'm flying around that I'm even kind of getting choked up right now talking about it. But when you see an aircraft land in an airport and you see a stretcher come out of that aircraft, whether it's a helicopter or a fixed wing aircraft, or you see a cooler come out of that aircraft that contains organs, that's a big deal. And someday it could be you on that stretcher, and knowing that you have the airport to support those operations, it is something to think about. Also in terms of, service and commuter service, there are opportunities for anybody from the bottom of, I guess you'd call it the economic scale, to the top of the economic scale to realize the opportunities that aviation has to offer. You could call Mike, you could get flying lessons, you could become a pilot, and you could rent Mike's plane from him and you could fly that to the Twin Cities. That's kind of at the bottom end of the economic scale. You could also call NetJets up and have them come in with one of these sea aircraft, and you could hop in that NetJet and have it fly you to California. So there is the opportunity for anybody and everybody in the community to see the benefits and realize the benefits. It may not always be a direct benefit to you, but there are many indirect benefits that people in the community get to see or realize from their local airports. And a lot of times they don't know it. But if you need a heart and that heart came into Hayward, you're going to be very thankful that you had that airport, that airport.
And the other
Everyone does it.
I'm sorry. Yes. Anything. I mean, I see a lot of, if I've seen, no, I do see it. I see the cooler, someone dies in a car accident, the ambulance pulls up to the airport, the cooler gets put in a Learjet, and that Learjet flies to somebody who needs the heart. It's common.
Yeah, it happens. It really does happen. And you can't put an economic value on that. And not only that, in communities, I will say this, I don't know this to be true, but I'm gonna make a guess, and a highly educated one. I would imagine that there's more than one doctor that services your community via airplane from another larger community, because they do that. A lot of smaller communities can't afford to staff hospitals, so the doctors fly around the state. It's very common. And so you get traveling doctors basically through the airport. I will tell you this too. There are other companies, I'm not going to mention names because I'm not allowed to. It's not our business. There's a lot of companies that have people here spending millions of dollars. Even if it's the guy that comes in to have a place where they're going, they're spending money in your community, thousands, if not more, dollars at the restaurants in all of your community things. So that's supporting jobs here locally. So and I know that a lot of people have a hard time with that, and that's why Andy said it. You can go down the rabbit holes of economic benefit. But the direct impacts, I get it, people want to argue the indirect stuff, but there are direct impacts happening that this airport definitely supports. And that is something that you would lose if the airport was diminished for sure.
Let me just ask one final question. So I've been a critical care nurse for more than 40 years, and I know that the importance of organ transplants and everything. However, we do not have a level anything trauma center here. So I doubt that, I don't know this, but I don't think we're going to be keeping a heart transplant or an organ transplant from happening. If they land in Hayward, they'd have to go to Duluth to at least a level 1 trauma center. The other thing, I don't think, just as in closing, I hope, Mike, that you can come up with some alternative that can appease the pilots that want more hangars without confiscating homes and damaging the environmental aspect. That's what people come to Hayward for. And if a pilot wants to bring his family in, maybe use a car sometimes. We don't always need to, we have to think about how this impact is going to level the environmental aspect of our county. The other thing that you mentioned, the economic impact, the Jack Links doesn't own any property in Sawyer County. He's in another county, so I don't know that he's spending money in our county. I know that the Johnsons don't live in Sawyer County, and so they're not contributing to Hayward economics. And I still don't understand how the federal government can mandate that a pilot will come in to an airport that doesn't have all of the safety aspects that you're saying enlarging the airport has to have. I do thank you for your time and for giving us the opportunity. Doesn't sound like we have a choice, but it just feels like this is being it feels like it's being done to us, and I don't like that feeling. I know you put a lot of work into it. I've done a lot of work like that in a previous life, and I know you did hard work. I guess that's all. Thank you.
I appreciate the comments. Seriously, thank you for that, and they're very much noted.
Very quickly, you've done a good job of letting us know that FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, is the true control factor here, correct?
Yes.
And a lot of the local issues that we brought up tonight, stuff like that, that we would normally take to our local officials are subject to that.
Correct.
Okay, let's assume a worst case scenario. We have a B1 or B2,
Yeah.
B2 right now, which C and D planes are accepting and using And as it hits a threshold of 501 planes a year, we are now liable for any kind of activity, correct?
That is absolutely potential.
All right. Okay. In the event that you are not able in any of your plans to mitigate the environmental factors or to win a zoning case on the west side of Hospital Road, and you are unable to accomplish any of the goals of the plan, and our B2 airport had 501 C1 flights, are we still eligible? Are we still liable?
You know, and the reason I brought up Scottsdale earlier, and I again brought it up tonight, they could likely make the case that they didn't have time to do it. And they were liable. I'm not going to say that they didn't try. You know, that airport blew up so fast, the Phoenix area grew unbelievably fast.
Well, I guess my point, Mike, is that if you can't mitigate these wetlands because of other things, and you can't achieve some of the other local land use planning and zoning goals that are on the west side of the road, FAA won't give us the money, correct? Because you can't provide an airport greater than a B2.
I've yet to see an airport not mitigate environmental.
Well,
and again, I've been doing this for 30 years.
Good.
And I'm not saying it's not possible, and I'm not saying that everything is doable. I'm not.
But then let's say some politician in Washington takes away FAA's funding.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If FAA cannot fund the expansion of this airport, is the Hayward Airport still liable as a B2 airport?
No, I think now that you brought it to that term, and I said it earlier, if they're unwilling to fund the improvement, you will have a case to argue that you tried what you're doing in this plan. You're at least putting forth an idea. The idea is I can do this, or we can do this, which is all we're doing. Again, I'm going to be very clear. At the end of this, all we're doing is saying this can be done to answer the question.
Right. Thank you.
And if the FAA is unwilling to fund it, which by the way, would be the most likely of all the scenarios we said, knowing FAA, they just don't have a massive well of money. So that said, I would suggest that as long as Andy and the commission went forth, asked for the money, and they said no, for whatever reason, then that's your answer. And if there were to be litigation, your answer was we tried. And then you could prove non-negligence. I mean, there's other options there. And so again, you're simply following the rules. You're doing what you have to do without a guarantee at this point. But good question. Yes.
Airport to the north, but there's multiple acres for sale. And if the use of that land has ever been considered, I mean, you wouldn't have to change roads, you wouldn't, you just need to build your hangars.
You're talking.
You're talking about Heisel property? Mrs. Cooper's property, yeah, okay. It's on the other side of the trout stream, on the north side of the Mauser Road.
Oh, north side, okay.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I could provide an answer for that. It was before my time. I've seen some of the previous reports that were done. I know that in one of the previous studies, they did look at alternate airport sites. Mike hit on.
A contiguous.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misinterpreted your question. I guess the answer to that from an engineering perspective, and it kind of ties in with the RPZs that Mike showed earlier, you don't develop underneath of an approach or departure surface to a runway, because that is where you need to keep clear in case of an aircraft accident.
Yeah, and not only that, proximity, you got to remember that most of what we're doing on the land side is going to rely on the private development sector. They're the ones that are going to fund the hangar. More often than not. It's possible locally that could be done, but that's a bonding and that's all separate. So if we're talking about a land lease with the development, anytime you make that inconvenient for the operator, they don't want to do it. And if you're going to taxi a mile to get to the runway, that's gonna turn a lot of people off. Not to say it's impossible. I just haven't seen it on a traditional development. And the question is how would you get the taxiways over there? More than likely, the FAA is not going to fund that taxiway, so you're now paying for it yourself at 100%, which that taxiway is going to be in the hundreds, if not millions of dollars. And so all of that said, it would be a challenge to get that done locally, and it would likely be a local cost. But again, we can certainly look at that if the runway weren't encumbered. But I thought there was a road up there that cut that off. They're on the north side of that protection zone? And okay, then I'm. That's what I thought too. That's why I'm just going off memory. So I apologize if my memory's shot. I'm getting older.
Road and all the emphasis, I mean, it's all right there, and they could put some of these better uses for other things if needed.
Well, we'll take a look at it for sure. I mean, if we missed that, I will look. I just didn't think that there was anything available. So thank you for the comment. We'll definitely look at it. Yes.
Any flight time of flight restrictions currently for us?
No. No, and you can't have them. That's part of ANCA. You cannot put a curfew in. There's less than a handful of airports that still have that available to them. John Wayne is the most famous. They have a lot of operations. If you'd like to have an interesting experience on takeoff John Wayne, because you have to pull back thrust and everything. But that was solved with ANCA. From ANCA on, you couldn't do it anymore. So if an operator wanted to operate at 3 a.m, they can operate at 3 a.m, and you couldn't tell them no. Under current law.
In the last 10 years about time of flight out of Sawyer County.
Any noise complaints?
I complain. I'm wondering if anyone's heard anything. Yeah,
I'm not aware.
Okay. I just, I brought it up to a previous supervisor, and it's been a few summers ago, but I was curious and I wanted to know if it I mean, when your house shakes at 3 o'clock in the morning, it wakes you up.
Yeah, I bet it does.
So,
I would imagine that's true. And I believe it completely.
Then on the date, someone says to me, "Oh, did you hear that jet boat?" And I go, "Yeah."
Well, and that's why, again, the noise model actually penalizes that operation pretty heavily, because not only is it loud, but it's nighttime, there's no other noise, and it becomes louder perception wise. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why the model does that. And we have to estimate the nighttime operations. And so that is something we will model for sure. Yes, sir. Let me use my calculator that my teacher said I'd never have in my pocket. Total, we're looking at 17,000 annual operations during the year. In the long term, you divide that out daily, you're talking 46 operations a day throughout the whole day. Usually 12, sometimes a little more. You may get some aircraft activity, especially nighttime training. See, this is what you don't have a lot of now. Airports with flight schools do a lot of nighttime training. They have to. Pilots have to be proficient at nighttime. And so you don't have a lot of that now. It may not be the loud boom, but you get a lot of pattern work at 10 o'clock at night. That can be annoying too. And so again, I'm agreeing with you. Those can be nuisances for sure. The definition though of significant, that's why the definition of the environmental groups of significant is not the same as what you may feel it to be. And that's not the most fortunate thing, but I have to tell you that. I'm the one that gets to tell you that, unfortunately. Yes.
I was just going to see if there was any more questions.
Yes, any more questions? We are
done. I can wrap us up.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you all. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on remote. This is Claire Balfour. I own property on the Nimmokagon, and I just had a quick question about, you mentioned the next meeting, and I'm assuming it's another public workshop.
Yep.
Type meeting like this, you know, approximately when that is. That's the first question. And second, it sounded like that a recommendation of one of these plans would accompany that meeting with a cost evaluation. Is that correct?
Yes, the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for the September-October timeframe. We'll know more in about a month out is when we'll send notice to the community. The summertime's really busy, so we try to stay out of the hair there. And as far as what it will include is a recommendation, and it may not be one of these. I mean, we may be looking at other things or not other completely, but like a machination of several of these alternatives. So that's still open to us after we collaborate back with the county. So that is an opportunity. But again, yes, we will provide what the plan would be, still allow for your comments and questions and all that, just like we're doing here. At that point, still nothing's done. We haven't yet asked for approval. After that meeting is when we will put a draft final together, go to the county and ask for their approval, and then ask for the FAA's approval as well. And then it would be done. So we still have a full 6 months left till we'll even go to that far yet.
And then I think in interim, everything's on the website.
Yep.
Will your presentation from?
Yeah, and I think you were recording. If necessary, we can even link the recording to the website. We can do whatever you need.
Will there be any,
PowerPoint, all of it will be on the website.
Will there be any other updates to the website before the September, October meeting?
No, we probably won't have anything else to add to it. Unless there's any sort of changes. We usually don't add anything else to it, but yeah, it'll definitely have the new data set or new information when we get closer to the meeting.
Right. I just want to thank everybody for coming and keeping it productive, and the website's there for reference and email for other comments in the interim.
Thank you.
Thank you.